After another weekend of confrontations between pro-Trump supporters and Black Lives Matter protesters, including another shooting death, both Trump and Joe Biden are stepping up the blame game.
This president long ago forfeited any moral leadership in this country. He can't stop the violence because for years he's fomented it.
As for Trump, he has been taking to Twitter, as is his wont, to call the Black Lives Matter protesters anarchists and agitators while praising his supporters, even retweeting a video of a caravan driving into Portland with the caption, "Great Patriots." A man reportedly affiliated with a right-wing group was shot and killed during the fights that escalated between those two sides Saturday night. And Portland's mayor is pointing his finger at Trump for the hate and division that led to those fights as well. A claim the president shot back at, tweeting, "The people of Portland, like all other cities and parts of our great country, want law and order. The radical left Democrat mayors like the dummy running Portland or the guy right now in his basement unwilling to lead or even speak out against crime," apparently a reference to Joe Biden, "will never be able to do it." That last guy, again, he's referring to has to be Biden. Trump has also refused to condemn the actions of the 17-year-old accused of killing two people and hurting another during a protest against the police shooting of Jacob Blake. He even liked a post on Twitter in which someone wrote, "Kyle Rittenhouse, the alleged killer, is a good example of why I decided to vote for Trump." Of course, this is not the first time the president's been accused of inciting violence, but some are raising concerns that this is reaching a new level. I'm joined now by Boston Globe opinion writer Abdullah Fayyad and BU political science assistant professor Lauren Mattioli. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Lauren, let me start with you because you are an expert in the presidency and the relationship of the presidency to law enforcement. I wanted to have this conversation on Greater Boston for the exact reason that I just mentioned. As I watched the president's response to Portland unfold, I was aghast. And I was aghast because I can't recall in my lifetime or in recent U.S. history another example of a president inciting violence like this. But there may be something that I'm missing. Maybe I'm being overly dramatic. Am I overstating this, or is this as anomalous as it seems to me?
I don't mean to dismiss your concern or say that what's happening right now is not important and unprecedented and something to be concerned about. Just that we should focus what we mean by inciting violence like this. So we've had lots of instances of presidents who incite violence, whether that's inciting American soldiers to commit acts of violence against people all over the world, to inciting law enforcement to exhibit violence against citizens, non-citizens, and just people who happen to be within the United States. And so I think if we very narrowly define the sort of violence that we see now, which is private citizen taking action, not taking orders from any sort of governmental hierarchy and committing acts of violence in the name of some governmental official against another citizen, I think that is unprecedented. But I think it is important to say it's not like Donald Trump is the first president to encourage violence. That would be a gross overstatement.
So I'll refine that characterization that I offered then and suggest that he's, as you put it, I'm paraphrasing, the first president we've seen encourage citizen-on-citizen violence by a sort of an extra-military, extra-legal group acting in his name. Again, I'm paraphrasing. You were much better. Abdullah Fayyad, I alluded to previous exhortations to violence or nudges to violent behavior that we've seen the president engage in. Can you flesh out for viewers who might have forgotten, might need a refresher, some of the similar behavior along these lines that we've seen from the president over his time as a candidate and then the head of the country?
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump as a candidate for president of the United States refused to condemn violence often. His supporters were showing up, sometimes, wearing Trump paraphernalia and exhibiting violent behavior, and he refused to condemn that early on, and he encouraged it. And then, as soon as he became president of the United States, within a year of his presidency, he praised white nationalists more or less by, saying that there were fine people on both sides of what transpired in Charlottesville when there was a white supremacist rally that ended up killing someone. They weren't serious words that condemned violence from the president of the United States. And when it comes to these protests, just this summer, he started this summer of protests by saying, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. He tweeted that. He was invoking a phrase that was used by a racist police chief in Miami. It was used by Bull Connor and segregationist George Wallace. That is the kind of political rhetoric that the president has used that has only fanned the flames. His supporters have simply just not been discouraged enough by him to not engage in violent behavior. And this is especially dangerous in the polarized era that we find ourselves in right now.
It's probably worth mentioning, because otherwise we may hear from viewers who complain that we didn't bring this up. There's been a push of late to try to rehabilitate Trump's comments after Charlottesville, with people saying, the media is not giving you the whole story. He condemned the bad people who were among the white nationalists, but then also spoke of good people on both sides. Again, I'm paraphrasing. To my mind, that kind of seems like splitting hairs. I mean, you look at the response that his comments elicited back when he made them, and there didn't seem to be much ambiguity there.
Absolutely, and he should not be encouraging anybody on the white supremacist side. White supremacy is inherently violent, and so no one should be praised for being on the side of white supremacists. And yeah, he did say both sides, but just like you said, that's splitting hairs.
Lauren Mattioli, I'm wondering if you, as someone who studies the presidency, if you have a sense of what President Trump's motivations are here. We've seen at least one, I believe, White House aide, I think Kellyanne Conway, may have been someone else, was recently on TV saying this is beneficial for the president heading into the election if people see chaos in the streets and believe that he's the guy who can fix it. That gives it sort of a calculating bent. Do you think that he's sizing up an opportunity for political gain here, or do you think he is simply giving voice to deeply held sentiments that he and his supporters have, whatever the outcome from voicing those may be?
My sense is that this is a continuation of the Trump playbook, which has proven successful, at least by his estimation, in the past. So to the extent that we might think this is an acceleration or an increase in the explicit endorsement of violence, I think the extent to which I don't think the president is making a new calculation. I think this is a strategy that he's already acted upon and has already committed to. And we've seen lots of instances of this in less subtle and more explicit ways in the past, ever since he started running for president.
Abdullah Fayyad, what is your take on where everything that is currently, I was going to say brewing, but that suggests novelty, where things that have been building for years and are currently at this uniquely fraught moment, where do you see this heading between now and Election Day and possibly after Election Day?
As of right now, it's alarming, and people should be alarmed. It doesn't seem like it's heading anywhere good. Right now, in just the last week or so, 3 people have died as a result of protests happening outside and counter-protesters coming and clashes between citizens. So 3 people have already died, and the rhetoric has only been escalating from the White House. I mean, just today, the press secretary said that the president will not weigh in on Kyle Rittenhouse's murder of 2 people. He shot and killed 2 people in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and the president is refusing to weigh in on that as of right now. So when the president continues to escalate his rhetoric against these protesters, the very large majority of whom have been peaceful over the summer, there are going to be people who will view the protesters as violent, just like the president is saying, even if that is untrue. So if the president refuses to acknowledge that that most of these protesters are peaceful, that they are protesting a just cause, his supporters, millions of people, are not going to believe that these people are, protesting peacefully. So they're going to think they're criminals. That's the language he's using. And that's what mentality Kyle Rittenhouse must have had.
Well, I find that refusal to condemn what Kyle Rittenhouse is accused of doing so troubling, because it basically is a not so tacit endorsement of people deciding to apply lethal force as they see fit. And I know that in the Boston area we are somewhat insulated from this, knock on wood. We haven't seen the sort of standoffs here that we've seen elsewhere, but it really does make me worry about what I guess we're heading into in the future. Lauren Mattioli, I want to give you the last word here. As someone, again, I think I've said this 5 times over the course of our convo, who studies the presidency, do you have a feeling for whether we are seeing a fundamental shift in the way presidents believe they can talk about violence, and violence directed specifically to your original point against American citizens? Or do you expect that 4 years from now, 8 years from now, 12 years from now, we will all look back on this moment and say to ourselves, wow, what the hell was that about?
This is something I've been grappling with as well. I think it's largely dependent on how successful President Trump will be if he'll be reelected in the fall. I think if President Trump is reelected, that'll be sort of an endorsement of this sort of behavior, and any future president would be foolish, perhaps, not to pick up the mantle and continue on in the same rhetoric from a purely political perspective. However, in one of the tropes in political science is that good policy is good politics. And I don't think that this sort of rhetoric and the sort of action that it inspires can continue, is sustainable into the future. Primarily because a call to law and order, while at the same time inciting vigilantism, is sort of the president's talking out of both sides of his mouth. And one side is saying, to respect the law, to observe it, for protesters to stay home, that they're looters and criminals and violent, and at the same time endorsing people who are flouting the law openly. And that's not a policy that's sustainable. So I think for the future, whether the president is successful in the fall, and when the sort of chickens come home to roost on this sort of doublespeak, is going to be determinative.
It doesn't seem like it's sustainable for the future, and it definitely seems like it's a horrible thing for the civic health of our polity. Lauren Mattioli, Abdullah Fayyad, thank you both for talking this through.
Thank you for having me.